Hello, everybody. I'm Myron Metcalf, the founder of the Marion Key Book Club at Hennepin County Library, and I am joined with Lindsay Peifer, who currently is the Senior Program and Policy Analyst Specialist in AAPI Outreach and Engagement in the Community Advocacy and Partnership Department of the National Education Association. She's a former St. Paul Public Schools teacher who also did a lot of diversity and equity work there. She's a member of Education Minnesota's Ethnic Minority Affairs Committee. She was also the secretary of the National Education Association's API caucus. And Lindsay is also going to be the moderator for the panel on our next book, which is Minor Feelings by Kathy Park Hong. It's an incredible book. We're so glad that everyone is enjoying it with us. Lindsay, we talk about these things all the time. This is sort of natural for us. But I got so much out of reading this. I definitely wanted to know your perspective. But one thing she said in United, the first chapter of this book was, when I hear the phrase, Asians are next in line to be white, I replace the word white with disappear. Asians are next in line to disappear. What did you capture from this amazing opening chapter in this incredible book?
Thank you for that introduction. And you are right. There is so many amazing points in here. So I tried to narrow it down to two major points for each chapter that we'll be discussing tonight. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, I should say, in terms of chapter 1 is this idea about bare life that she introduces on on page 20. So living without the protection of society and where the person is, quote, stripped of every right by virtue of the fact that anyone can kill him without committing homicide. He can save himself only in perpetual flight. And so when we're looking at laws and policies that have been implemented in US history that take away the protection of society, we see it in 1854 with the US appealed the case People versus Hall, which the California Supreme Court ruled the testimony of a Chinese man who witnessed a murder by a white man was inadmissible, largely based upon the opinion that the Chinese were, quote, a race of people whom nature has marked as inferior and who are incapable of progress or intellectual development beyond a certain point, end quote, and as such had no right to, quote, swear away the life of a citizen or participate with us in administrating the affairs of our government, end quote. And so this court case categorized Chinese alongside indigenous people and African Americans as lacking status to testify against European Americans in court. We see this continual living without protection of society with the Page Act of 1875, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, and so many other laws that were passed, but then also the anti-Asian violence that surround and follow these laws, right? The Denver Chinatown Massacre, the Rock Springs Massacre, Seattle riot, on, right? We see it in the murder of Vincent Chin, whose murderers got no jail time. We see it in the lack of representation in Hollywood. We see it where Hollywood still continues to perpetuate harmful stereotypes, the perpetual foreigner, the emasculation of men, the hypersexualization of women. We see so many different ways that we live this bare life that when I read that line, you just have to sit with it for a little while, right? And see that this is, it explains so many things in such a succinct way that I didn't do right there. But it is so powerful, this idea of a bare life. And I think that she continues that idea through chapter 2 as well. The other quote from chapter 1 that she says, quote, we will not be the power, but become absorbed by power, not share the power of whites, but be stooges to a white ideology that exploited our ancestors. This country insists that our racial identity is beside the point, that has nothing to do with being bullied or passed over for promotion or cut off every time we talk. Our race has nothing to do with this country even, which is why we're often listed as other in polls and why we're hard to find in racial breakdowns on reported rape or workplace discrimination or domestic abuse. My existence is not enough, never enough. So I become compulsive in my efforts to do better, be better, blindly following this country's gospel of self-interest, providing my individual worth by expanding my net worth until I vanish. And I think that really ties into what you started this conversation with, that your quote.
It's amazing you said all that. I mean, because uh, this book is about just a perspective, and I think a perspective that uh, we don't hear enough of, and that's why I wanted Minor Feelings to be the next book, and our conversations. I find that between our communities, there are so many similarities, so many experiences that are parallels. And she said something in chapter 2 in Stand Up that made me really think, because I could relate to it. I could feel it as she said it. She said, although my father eventually became successful, we were the exception. Every family I grew up with struggled. I think there are a lot of people across marginalized communities who've had that experience as well. When you read Stand Up, what was the impact of that chapter for you?
We are running out of time because I carried on so much about chapter 1, and I feel like I will have that tendency for every chapter. But I want to talk about this. She talks about Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's danger of a single story. And I feel like that is a really important thing to think about, to acknowledge, and that we must be able to balance multiple truths. That this is not a binary, it's not a zero-sum game, that in collectively working together, being in solidarity with one another, that's the answer, right? And so when she talks about minor feelings in chapter 2, and these racialized range of emotions that is built from sediments of everyday racial experience and the irritant of having one's perception of reality constantly questioned or dismissed. I feel like there are so many of us that can relate to that, right? Where the microaggressions and then macroaggressions come out in our everyday lives, and that it is really important to look at all of our stories and balance that multiple truths that exist.
Well, I thank you for that. And I'm looking forward to these conversations, which will continue leading up to the panel. Excited for you being the moderator of this Minor Feelings panel. And thank you all for watching. We really appreciate it.